Normally, well, they can be engineered in many different ways, these demolitions. Normally the purpose is to remove a structure while avoiding damage to adjacent structures, and to do so economically. So typically a tall building like these are demolished by placing thousands of cutter charges throughout the columns and beams in the building, and then detonating them in a very precise order, beginning with the interior structure and progressing outward, and from the ground up. Harnessing, what we do with taking out the ground floors first, harnesses the weight of the building to do much of the destruction. So the result is an implosion, like you see here, producing a vertical, symmetrical collapse at free fall acceleration, straight down through the path of what was the greatest resistance, the thousands of tons of structural steel in the building. So it's broken up and ready for loading and shipment into a consolidated rubble pile. Now this is a feat that only a handful of companies in the US can accomplish, and fire never has. So we're drawing some very distinct differences between explosions and fire, controlled demolitions and fire, natural collapses and fire-caused collapses. Is this one more example of a controlled demolition? Maybe. We'll come back to this one. The problem there is, of course, that it happened on 9/11. It was not one of the Twin Towers. Well, let's look at these features quickly. We have chemical evidence of cutter charges in controlled demolitions. And we have a straight down symmetrical collapse. Demolition waves remove the column supports, resulting in a free fall speed through the path of what was the greatest resistance. The total dismemberment of the steel structure, so it's broken up for loading and shipment. Minimal damage to adjacent structures, that's the idea. Sounds and flashes of explosives heard and seen by witnesses. Enormous clouds of pulverized concrete. Squids, or explosive charges, visible at the upper floors. And chemical evidence of cutter charges. That would be expected to be found in the debris. Now, all of this is direct evidence of explosive destruction. None of it can be accounted for by fire, let alone all 10 of these features. So if we have these, we're pretty darn sure we have an explosive demolition, especially if we have government documentation. Some experts agree, those who don't have an agenda or conflicts of interest agree it's explosive demolition. Foreknowledge of the destruction. These are planned months in advance. So with video documentation, all that is pretty much proof. With that in mind, we're going to take a look at this third skyscraper to collapse on 9/11. I didn't know anything about it. How many of you don't know much at all about World Trade Center 7? How many of you don't know? Let me just get a count real high. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. And so let's take a look at World Trade Center 7, because it is the third worst structural failure in modern history. And most architects and engineers know nothing about it. Why? Well, we'll take a look in a moment. It's half the size of the Twin Towers. I think it's about the same size as the tallest building here in Amsterdam. And these were the tallest buildings in the world at one time, so it just makes it look dwarfed. I mean, it would be the tallest building in most of our states in the U.S. Now, it wasn't hit by an airplane. So we're going to take a look at it first, because most people don't know much about it. It was a football field in length away from the North Tower. And it collapses at about 9:20 in the afternoon, because when the towers went down, it was hit by some of the debris, and presumably that's what started some of these fires, which appeared about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But here's the building standing after the towers have come down. And what we're going to do is see if there's any features common to a controlled demolition. And let's start and see if there's a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure. Let's listen to Darryl, a medical student, interviewed that night in New York on the radio.
We were walking the building, actually, it was on fire. ground floor of the building on fire, and you know, we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was what looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building. The windows all busted out, and you know, it was horrifying. And then you know, about a second later, the bottom floor caved out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground.
This is really important. The order of this, you're going to hear this again and again. A sound of a clap of thunder, shock wave ripping through the building, windows busting out, and then the building coming down. Okay, so keep the order of the witness's testimony in mind. It's not that all this phenomenon is happening because the building is falling, in other words. Let's listen to Dan Rather narrate his viewing of what for many of us will be our first viewing of World Trade Center 7's collapse.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Now we go to videotape the collapse of this building. It's an amazing, incredible picture work. For the third time today, reminiscing of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by... Well, Dan's using his intuition to describe to us what he's seeing, which is great. I mean, we all should be doing this. I didn't do this as I was watching the Twin Towers come down in my home on 9/11 on TV. I mean, I'm in a state of shock. I remember what the heck is going on here? What am I looking at? I just wanted some answers. So we'll get to the Twin Towers in a moment. But why didn't Dan ever tell us about this collapse again after the day of 9/11? It's as if a curtain was drawn over this story, and none of us, with very few exceptions, know it. It wasn't played on mainstream media. Do we have a straight-down, symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint? Let's watch from West Street. Yeah, pretty much straight down, very symmetrical. Watch the penthouse fall a half a second prior to the rest of the building. Let's swing it back up. Half a second, indicating complete core column damage under that penthouse. I'm not quite convinced yet. Here's a controlled demolition on the right and building 7 on the left. Is there any comparison, similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant new investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, and every skyscraper that has come down has been as a result of a controlled demolition, and no skyscraper has ever come down due to fire. And yet NIST only examined the hypothesis of destruction by fire, not taking controlled demolition seriously, and these fires. Now these are the worst fires that we have photos or videos of. Those fires brought that building down. Most architects and engineers don't buy it. The theory is that at column 79, under the east penthouse, because the east penthouse falls about 6 seconds prior to the global collapse of this building. So it's targeted, and here's how it goes. Massive fires on this floor expanded these beams in a process, a new phenomenon called thermal expansion. This is the official story, pushing this girder off of its seat on this column, causing this floor to fall on this floor, to fall on the next floor, to fall on the next floor, leaving this column unbraced for 9 floors, and therefore it buckles and then the instability travels upward throughout the inside of the building, and laterally also, gutting the inside of the building, and then the exterior of the building just falls down. All of that happens in about 16 seconds. That's real extraordinary. Now, none of it could have happened whatsoever, is the problem. And let me just start with the fact that these fires were out over an hour prior to when NIST said they were raging in here and expanding these beams. How could the beams be expanding when the fire had been out for an hour? NIST's own photographs reveal that lie on their part. But let's say that fire was raging in here. These beams could not have expanded. Why? They're fireproofed. They have fireproofing. They're designed to keep cool in a fire. But let's say they weren't fireproof, or they could have been expanded. How did NIST get them to expand in their computer model? They applied all of the heat to that beam in just 1.5 seconds, forcing the beam in the computer model to expand linearly instead of sagging, which is what the beams do according to the tests that you saw. But let's say the beams could have expanded linearly. What's the other problem here? Well, there's little pins tying that beam up into the slab structure up above. And so it couldn't have actually expanded. But since they applied all that heat, it expanded and tore out those pins. Why? Because they didn't apply any heat to the concrete composite floor up above, only heating in the computer model the beam. So they expanded differentially. Okay, let's say that could have happened. This girder could never have been pushed off of its seat. Why? Because it has the same pins or shear studs connecting it to the floor structure up above. It could not have been pushed. So NIST says, well, they forgot to put the shear studs in. Well, the construction document shows shear studs. Well, they have no evidence to suggest that they weren't put in. But let's say that they weren't put in. Could this girder have been pushed off of its seat on this column? This is the angle seat right here. No. Why? Because it would have had to have been pushed more than 6 or 7 inches, and the maximum linear expansion, according to NIST, was only 3 or 4 inches. So it couldn't even have fallen off of this seat, which it was bolted to, by the way, with 2 big bolts. But let's say that could have happened. This is just a series of ludicrous assumptions that we're being asked to swallow. This floor could not even have fallen on this floor. Why? Because there's girders, other girders, tying this whole floor system to this column. So the failure of this one girder could never have caused that floor to fail. But let's say all those girders failed at once. Could this floor have fallen on this floor? Probably not. It just would have sagged. Probably wouldn't even have touched this floor. But let's say it did. Would it have caused failure of this floor, which is, of course, has the same structure underneath it, which was not weakened by fire, so it couldn't have crashed through that floor at all. But let's say it did. Could it have caused the complete progressive failure all the way up the building?